Live streaming is on.
All right, thanks Dan for starting that. It's the November meeting of the Linux users group. I do have a brief presentation today on Sampler Box, which is a way to use your Raspberry Pi as a MIDI instrument using digital samples. I am not a musician. I don't claim to be, and I probably never will be, but I have developed a little bit of an interest in computers making music. I may explore that further with generative music and just synthesizers and other things, and I've also actually been tickled to learn that the many hardware synthesizers at their heart are actually Raspberry Pis. They make use of that to sort of simplify their process. Um, but what I've done is just I was trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I make something play a sample. I You can obviously do that on any computer. There's many pieces of software. One is called Fluid Synth that lets you play samples. Sound fonts are generally what they're called. Um, and this implementation is actually simpler than that. So you kind of have to pull the samples out of the sound font to make them usable. But I was able to get some things going. So I'm going to try sharing my screen. But first, I want to know, can you hear this? Because I don't quite understand audio routing, and I don't know. I will probably be able to hear this, but I don't know that you can. So, oh, actually, that's not on. So you're not going to hear anything. Bear with me.
Hello, Rusty.
Okay, tell me if you hear this. Anything?
Nothing.
Good,
No.
good, because it probably would suck anyway. All right. So let me share my screen, and I will show you what I did. I've already done it, so I'm not going to sort of work through it from scratch, which is my preferred way to demonstrate things. But I can probably do most of it because it is extremely simple. It is just a piece of software. The hardware is stuff that just exists in Linux. There's no hardware that there you can involve hardware in this project, but that's not sort of the way it goes. Let me share my screen. Let me just share my entire screen if I can. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I have a bunch of windows here. This is my Raspberry Pi. It is already running something, but I'm going to go to my browser window and go to this website, which is samplerbox.org. And basically you can do this as a hardware thing. But I didn't do that because I didn't really want to. There is one thing that I'm kind of lacking in this that's annoying, but that still won't require me to make any software. To make any hardware. I just need a slightly different implementation of my MIDI to make it work. So what I'm basically doing is just downloading a piece of software from this organization, and you can do it as an image. I did not do so because I already had a functional Raspberry Pi running other things. So I went and followed the manual process from here. And here you can see where they've created a box and an LED readout. So what this thing does is it just plays samples from a directory. And you create a file system and drop samples in a particular way, and it will read those files and play them from this piece of Python script. So you have to install certain prerequisites, which I did, and basically download this Python software and then run it. So I will show you where that exists on my machine here. So this is my, okay, I'll cancel that out because it was actually already running. So what I have is I have, okay, so I need to go to the home, the directory where this is. And you can see there's just a handful of files that come with this, but then it comes with a single sound, which is a very basic saw wave, which is like a synthesizer, you know, harmonic rich wave. Uh, and that has a sort of distinct synthesizer sound. But I downloaded some other things to try. What I was aiming for is I'm like a huge fan of prog rock. So I wanted to get something with a mellotron string sound. So I found that. I also found a mellotron flute sound, which is extremely, might be familiar to folks because of Strawberry Fields. It's featured in there. What a mellotron is it's a sample anyway. It is not an analog synthesizer. It is a sample, but it is a tape sample. What it does is it uses a length of tape that I think it's like 7 seconds long for each tape. And as you hit the keys on the mellotron, it will play that length of tape and play that sound. And you can play multiple pitches of that sound, and it creates, you know, a combination of string sounds or flute sounds or whatever the tape is. So it is sort of an early sampler as well. So it's a perfect thing to run a digital sample of, because I mean that's kind of what it is. The original Mellotron has a lot of variation, so that you may notice if I play that sound, it'll have a lot of warble and wobble because of the nature of the tape, and the sample was taken from an actual instrument. So it won't have the variation because it is digital, but it will have the the variation as sampled at that time. So that's what that is. So really, I am just going to run this. Oh, and the thing I can't do is that you can have the hardware will let you use a switch to change uh, the the program, the different samples. I don't have the ability to do that because I have not wired up such a switch on my Pi. And I do. It will also allow the program change feature of MIDI that they're called CCs, which are basically control commands. I don't know if that's what it stands for or not, but that's what you can think of them as. And you can use the program change to do this as well. My MIDI controller doesn't have um, that feature on it, so to change this, I have to do it in a very manual fashion, which is to actually go to the script and change the preset, which is the default. So if I go to here, I can go to the saw sound, and that will be what loads. And let me go to my Jitsi configuration. I mean, my Jitsi configuration, and change what my input is. This is not it. Where did it go? Am I going to be able to do this? There we go. All right, so you probably won't be able to hear me while I'm doing this, but I will change my audio settings to use I have the Pi plugged directly into like an audio interface, like a cheap Amazon, stupid audio interface. And I'm going to change the input to that. So you won't hear me, but I should be able to play a note on my MIDI keyboard. So let me do that. Were you able to hear that?
I
Yes.
heard like a
Okay.
tone.
That was, pardon?
Heard a tone.
Yeah, that was the saw, which is like one of the most basic of sounds. I think the reason they include that as the default sound is it's essentially it's tiny, like it's the smallest possible sample file. But you can also download much more involved samples. Like this will be a grand piano um, uh, sample, and I'll show you that it is much more involved. Let me find where I do this. It's a lot easier to start from the bottom. I met that preset. There we go. Preset equals 1. And I will reload that. Well, first let me show you where this is. The samples are fairly involved. If we look at the grand piano sample, there are samples for the various notes at the various octave ranges. So this is a D sharp in octave 2. But then they also have variations for velocity. So if I play the key softly on a piano, it's obviously softer, but it's a piano. It's a hammer hitting a string. So the sound of a piano hitting a string softly isn't just softer, it has a different sound characteristic. So the variations on velocity are actually different sound files. So they've sampled this grand piano being played at different velocity levels, which is pretty cool, which makes for a much more realistic experience.
Brent, simplistically, is a different velocity lead to a different frequency? A higher pitch or a lower
No,
pitch?
a different velocity, it most importantly leads to different loudnesses. And that's what the primary function of velocity is. But what it is it's how hard you're hitting the keys. So if you hit a key hard on a piano, it sounds different than hitting a key soft. So I'm going to demonstrate that real quick. Let me fire this up. And I think I've loaded grand piano. Grand piano takes like a lot longer to load because you can see there's a lot more data there. So let's wait for it to load, and then I will swap over. It is loaded. So let me swap over to that sound device again. I don't know why I'm on video because I'm dumb. So let's go to audio, and I will swap over. You will no longer hear me.
And is that you pushing different keys?
It is. I have a MIDI keyboard, which let's see if I can show it off here. It's going to be hard to see because the angle of this is. So do you see that over there? It's
Yeah.
in front of a hardware synthesizer. But yeah, I am banging keys on there. I tried to bang one very softly and then harder, and it, as you could tell, it made, to me, what sounds like a fairly realistic piano sound, with the appropriate speakers and so forth. You could cobble together a very inexpensive piano, which I may do because my son's hardware digital piano is showing its age. So one option is to get him another one because they're cheap. They're not hard to come by. I could try to fix it. Probably will, because if something's broken, it's always worthwhile to fix, right? Or I could cobble together something that's digital and has a bunch of sounds and is fun to play with. He'll probably just want me to give him something that he doesn't have to fuss with as much.
Parenthetically, Brent, when you say cheap, what price range are we talking? 25 or less, or 200 and more?
Well, I mean, that just depends on how big you build it, right? Because this this MIDI controller is small and cheap, and it's not the cheapest, but it was like 70, 80 bucks, right?
Gotcha.
I could get one with 88 keys, that is really nice, like that is has because these keys are not, they don't feel like piano keys, they're not weighted, they are velocity sensitive, but you're not going to fool yourself into thinking you're playing a piano. But you can get key beds that do fool you into thinking you're playing a piano, that have that feel. They are much more expensive though. So I mean, yeah, I could spend $1,000 on this, but if I spend $1,000 on this, I could buy a really nice electric piano that, if that's what I'm going for. But again, I probably won't, because that's probably not what my son would want, because he's used to playing this, dedicated 88 key, digital piano that we bought years ago for him. But it it's an option, because it could do a lot of things if he wants to do a lot of things. But this was just a fun thing, and I may use it if I get more into music, because it is a very easy and inexpensive way to create a arbitrary sound. Like, I could use samples for anything. So let me pick one more potential sound here.
It's amazing how realistic that piano sound was.
Yeah, it is a really awesome sample, and it was a free sample. I didn't have to steal anything. So let me go back here, and I will go to the Mellotron sound, because like I said, I do love a Mellotron. And I will fire that guy up. Okay, and I will go ahead and swap over. Make sure I have the reach with my cable here. I keep going to that camera. I don't know why. Audio. And I will disappear from audio.
Wow. That's impressive.
Phantom of the Opera.
Nice.
What kind of Raspberry Pi do you require for this software? What generation?
It is, I think it's an old project, so I think it says like anything from like a 2B up, if that's even a thing, I forget. Mine's a 3 something. And it does fine. There is some latency. I have tweaked it a little bit. Let me show you that. So latency in music is bad, because you need to keep in time. So if you hit a key, it should make that sound when you hit the key. Playing it like I'm playing it now, it on this meeting, to me, it sounds like there's quite a bit of latency. That's not the experience I get when I'm playing it directly. But there's still some, and there are things I can do to improve upon that. One of them is that I did is actually in the script itself, and I'm not remembering precisely what that is called, but it's basically the okay, it's these parameters, the block size and the sample rate. They suggested actually upping the sample rate to 48 from 44.1, which was the default. And I brought the block size down from 512, I think it was, as default, to 128. So that's one thing I did. Obviously, that's going to affect the audio quality, but it didn't seem to do terribly. Another thing that can have some effect, which is in the config file, is the polyphony, which was, I think, yeah, by default 80. I brought it down to 8. So that's the number of voices that can appear at a time, which is obviously the number of keys that you can press, but also when sounds are sustained, like on a piano, um, that's the number of sustained sound, individual sounds you can hear at one time. On a piano, a polyphony of 8 is really low. If you're talking about sounds that don't sustain, like on the Mellotron or on a synthesizer sound, 8 is actually sufficient. But if I really wanted to create a full-fledged piano sound, I would want to have greater polyphony. Another factor in this is I just took this Raspberry Pi, which is in the exact same state it was when I had done the NTP project years ago, whenever that was. Um, I uh, I didn't really do anything special with it, but you can use a build of the Raspberry Pi OS with a real-time kernel, and supposedly that helps with latency as well. So if I want to create an actual instrument out of this thing at any point, I will want to use a dedicated Pi and build it in a dedicated way for music, which this one is not set up that way. So again, I could download any number of files. I did start with a sound font for the Mellotron sound, and I actually had the sound font is actually an archive. I forget if it's like um, a gzipped file or what. But it's something you can open with an archive program and pull out um, the samples, and they do need to be in a particular format for the thing to read them. So if you look the way these are set up, it expects to see that 0 space name, and then it will open those those folders and pull out the samples. And it does expect to have you can tell it how to deal with like velocity and so forth. So if we go to the grand piano sound, there should be, I don't know if this is like a setup by default. No, there's a definition file. So if you look at the definition file, nope, cat. You can show that the note name 4, 7, 11, 14, 16. One thing I noticed about this is it's not using the vast majority of these files based upon this definition. It is only using 5 different possible velocities. So if you're in the 40-ish range with velocities, I don't know exactly how it uses this, if it's 40 and below or what, or if there's like a like whatever you're closest to. Um, uh, if you're in that range, it uses this file. If you're in this range, it uses this file. But if you look, there's a lot more files than that in these samples. So I could actually get more fine-tuned velocities than what this is doing by default. But I did think that was really interesting, that it is sort of underusing its sample, which is kind of a shame, because like, why am I taking up all the disk space to do this? I think I know why, because you noticed how long it took to load the samples it did load. I think it's probably only loading the samples it needs. So it probably would load a lot slower if I, defined 16 different velocity levels and 16 different samples. So it's making do with 5, but it sounds reasonable with that. But it's really, I mean, you can sort of do whatever you want with these, which is pretty cool. It's very, very flexible.
Brent, question.
Sure.
Can you just use a Raspberry Pi software or firmware or ISO in a virtual box and do it from a computer?
Virtual would be very questionable, because even if the hardware all worked out, there would be so much latency that you would pull your hair out. But this is not Raspberry Pi specific. the piece of hardware I had, I mean, it is built specifically for Raspberry Pi as a notion because of the idea that you would create hardware around it to do the program changes. So you could basically just hit a button to cycle through the various sounds on the box and have a readout, an LED readout, which I think is on the site here. No, it was here. So they built an example with like the audio out is on the box, you know, and all the interfaces are neatly broken out, and you have this LED readout, which is your preset number, and you cycle through it with hardware buttons. And that, like I said, those hardware buttons are really the only thing that I feel I'm missing because I don't have an easy way to cycle through them. Notice on this little Akai MIDI controller, it looks like they do have program buttons on there. I don't know for sure that that's what those do, but usually when those say program, that is what those are. I don't know if these are things that can be tied to particular program numbers or if they are just dedicated 1, 2, 3, 4, which is like what I think they say on there. But that would make things a little bit easier for me if I wanted to swap them. Like I said, I am not a musician and not actively using these for anything important. But if I did, I would absolutely want to be able to manipulate them in a better way, which to me would be, hey, as long as I have that ability on my MIDI controller, I would probably do it that way because like it's can be inconvenient to go push buttons on a box. Even if it's that easy, it's certainly more convenient than going into a script and changing a value and saving it and restarting it. But yeah. But you could build this on, to answer your question, you can build this on any computer. It is not Raspberry Pi specific. It is a Python script. And as long as you can interface with hardware, obviously the more powerful the hardware, the more flexible it's going to be. This is another thing I should say. It is suggesting that you should use a separate DAC for better sound quality. I don't know if that affects the latency or not, like if it improves the latency to use a better DAC. I did have a USB DAC laying around. I think I'm done with this. Oh, damn.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
You okay, Brent?
Uh-oh. What happened?
I touched my Raspberry Pi and created some sort of noise. Let me stop my screen share and get back on video. Oh, all right, come on. Okay, so screen share, stop sharing. All right, so can you all see me?
Yeah.
So just one of these really basic things that you might use with your phone in the car, you know, a little cheap USB digital audio converter. I did use that, although like I don't know that it would have been significantly different if I had used the onboard audio on the Pi. But I had it, so I used it because they said so. So that was the only hardware addition to the Pi itself. You know, obviously other than the keyboard, which I guess I can unplug and show you now as well. I don't know. There's 3 things plugged into it, so I'm not gonna mess with it. You saw it good enough. All right. Any quick questions on that?
I have some quick questions.
Sure.
Where do you buy your Raspberry Pi hardware, and is it availability? There was a big wait to get them, like a bunch of months. Is that still the case, or?
I solved that by buying my hardware in the distant past.
Did you buy it the Wayback Machine? That where you bought it?
I mean, it's been a long time. I think I have owned. I was scratching my head on this because I'm like, didn't I sell a Pi to somebody or give it away? And I'm like an older Raspberry Pi. I think I have had 2 Raspberry Pis, and this is my second one.
Okay.
But it is like, let's see if I can look at it and see what it
You
says.
probably have a
about.
Raspberry Pi 3B Plus.
I let me look at it because I don't remember. It is a Raspberry Pi Model B version. I think it says 1.2. If my eyes don't fail me, which they often do. So that's what I'm using, and those are not new. They're
Oh, no.
a few
1.2.
generations behind. So I've been holding on to this to do the whatever it does for me whenever I do it, and I've not so far felt the need to buy anything new. So I can't speak to availability of the devices. I know that it was really challenging for a while there. I did hear that things were getting a little better, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. Yeah, I've got a 3B plus and a 8 gig, so that probably would run better on a 3B plus or a 4.
So is this about a 10-year-old machine?
Maybe that sounds about right. I don't remember when I bought it. It's not recent memory.
Because my son bought a Raspberry Pi, and I think it was probably close to 10 years ago.
Yeah, I said my first Pi was before that. I think. Again, I just really don't remember. I'm pretty sure I owned a 2 though. So I think I owned a 2 and got rid of it, which I don't regret too much because it's not expensive. And when I do stuff with the Pi, sometimes I do feel like the lack of RAM and CPU are limiting. Yeah, if I were to do this again, if I were to do this for real, I would dedicate a Pi to it just because of the things that you can do to improve the latency would make it a better dedicated device, and just not having to set everything up because if I have a Pi, it's going to do whatever I want to play with it at the time. So it'd be good to have a Pi dedicated for that purpose. So maybe I'll be in the market if I keep playing with these things. Anything else before we move on?
Well, thanks for the presentation.
I did have another notion, and I thought maybe I could do a double, but I don't think I will, because for one, I don't think I could really do this topic justice, but I think it's worth doing. And you may recall me saying of the difficulties I had with my machine locking up, and that machine is now permanently parked over by my router. But since the machine's issues were all related to graphics, by not running a GUI, it is now back to being 100% stable. And since it has gobs of RAM, one thing I have done on it historically is run virtual machines, but now I'm running virtual machines on it in a headless configuration. So I can show y'all how what I could do is save the virtual machine that I have on there, because it did take some time to set up, because it is a image. It is a official work image that I use for client testing as like a remote client. And I could take that off and just sort of build it from scratch, which obviously I can't show you all of that because I don't have like a network KVM, but I could basically show you the install from the basic OS, which it's running a bare bones Debian. So and that running in a headless configuration, there were a lot of things I had to figure out. It was mostly just not running incompatible pieces of software, but yeah, that might be a worthwhile presentation, but I'm not going to struggle through that today.
Yeah, maybe
Question on that, is that
down the road.
basically like for servers, or end users also sometimes make use of a headless?
Is anyone else hearing Steve with the helium voice?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That was
Yeah.
weird.
He's on
I'll
drugs.
try to talk lower.
Yeah, there you go.
Is that better?
I know it's still weird.
Okay, let me. But did you get my question?
Oh
I'll
no,
go
I
you.
did. I did. I am using it for a specific purpose. I don't. I haven't. I do like. I can like test OSs on it. Like I can trial like, oh, this distribution to that distribution, and they can be graphical from the standpoint of the virtual machine. But what they can't be is like what that machine can't be is running its own like X windows. So but it can run like a virtual X windows that I can display on a screen. And what it's running now is actually Windows because I'm running that as a testing thing for work. But it's for me it's a virtual host. But what it's running as guests are going to generally be desktop type machines.
Okay, so I guess I'm not clear on the term headless.
What when I say headless, like I'm running on a machine here with a GUI because I need to do GUI things on it. When I was running that machine, that like old mini box on a machine with a GUI, it kept breaking, it kept locking up. It got to a point where it was locking up like every few months, you know, generally during our meetings, because that's like the most graphically intensive thing I did on it. It then started locking up more regularly, and then it would start locking up within minutes. It was experiencing a hardware failure in relation to its internal GPU. It's running now with just a lean Debian OS without Windows. If you were to plug a monitor in that machine, it would function, but just display plain old text. So it's running. I don't have a monitor running on it. I don't have a keyboard running onto it. That's what I mean by headless.
Right.
It doesn't have KVM.
Right.
I access it purely by SSH from this machine, and I'm accessing its virtual stuff by means of a remote client. But I will be doing this whole deal so we can sort of see what that actually means in a future presentation, which we did say as a goal to present at least every other month. So I'm not going to rush into that unless I just really feel eager to. I may do that next month, but at the very and I don't have to be the only person presenting. So I will aim to do that in January as a goal, unless somebody already has an idea for January or next month if they'd prefer.
Crickets.
Don't be shy. All right. So yeah, I'll aim for that in January. Then again, I may do it in December if I just really want to get it done. Just depends on how much time I spend on it. Cause I sort of have to, I did it, because I needed to do it. I wanted to do it. I needed somewhere to continue to run my virtual stuff, and I struggled through it. And only after the fact, I'm like, oh yeah, I could present on this. So I didn't take any notes. So I probably have to run through it myself once just to run through it and remember like what the steps are and figure out how I'm going to best present on it. And then, well, I'll of course run through it for the presentation. So it'll take a little bit of prep. And I might make even some slides on it since I'm making notes anyway. So yeah, I will plan to do that in January.
Got a question.
Sure.
I am interested in a discussion, which could be as a presentation plus discussion. I am not the best person to lead it by myself, but I figured if people are willing to engage offline in a sense for a few months and working it out, if there's enough interest in it, then I'd be happy to try to coordinate it and be involved in the presentation. And it's very simply, it's on the boot process. So that's my suggestion.
Okay. Do we want to have a sort of tentative goal on when?
I'm figuring I'm supposed to have, right now I'm supposed to have surgery in December, and I'm back. So, and I'm trying to make a transition from being a physician seeing patients to clinical pharmacology kind of consultant to my free clinic in probably April. So I'm thinking distant future, like May or June.
All right. Well, yeah, we won't make you commit to that, but we will start initial plans, I suppose.
What exactly
When
are
you
you?
say the boot process, what are you
Yeah.
talking about?
What
Steve?
exactly?
I have one machine that's mired in problems, which is running dual boot, and I've lost the ability to get into Windows. I can still boot into Linux, and I see this machine is interesting because it is was a machine that has both in the BIOS, it offers you a choice of UEFI or the compatibility mode. And that has radical implications. And I figured the problem in trying to understand these problems is the amount of detail involved in the individual steps that are really not necessarily clearly displayed. And I was thinking of a real step by step where you can see what the details are and make it kind of simpler and clearer. But there are a lot of details, and I'm not sure that I'm sure I'm not a master of them at this point. But I'm in the position of having two machines. One, both of them boot the same Linux distribution and Windows. One of them it's working fine, one of them not. And so I'm copying down. I've started copying down all the relevant files that I can figure are relevant into the process and comparing them, and just looking to see all the places where I might be screwing up, or the process might have screwed up without me doing it. So I thought that might be illuminating, because I know on the Antics forum, there's a lot of people who complain from time to time about a problem with booting. Fewer
Is-
people admit to being dual booters. It's kind of insulting.
Is it an Antix OS that you're trying to boot up?
Oh yeah, but it's basically based on Debian. So I don't think that the fact that it's Antics makes it a particular problem. I think it's a basic fundamental grub, grub trying to use chain loading, Windows boot manager, and if depending on the BIOS, going to the right place, and if you make a mistake anywhere along the line, Windows can get confused, and the general recommendation is, oh gee, either if you know Windows a lot, use boot rec commands, and a recovery USB, or just reinstall. But I'm having fun, intellectual fun, using this as a motivation to thrash through as many as the details about the steps involved, because I find them often murky. It says there's a win load, and then there's a boot mgfw.efi, and then it's got to be in the right directory. And it's very interesting to say, well, if I can see using the one that's working, where it's supposed to be in a standard install, maybe if I just do monkey see, monkey do, all of a sudden the other one will work. But then there's also the question of whether I really have a proper EFI setup, since I'm told, and I'd love to hear if anybody has ever heard of this, that if you want to find out if you really have EFI set up on a computer, you look for a directory called sys firmware EFI. If it's present, you've got UEFI set up. If not, you don't. But on the one that's not working, there's nothing there. On the one that is working, I've got it. The one that's not working, I still am using successfully either REFind, I'm not sure whether it's involving grub, or grub EFI. And as you know, there's separate grub EFI and grub PC for the the MBR style before UEFI. So that's a superficial kind of gross level of some of the details that can go wrong. I'm just finding it really, this is something for my retirement for the next 10 years if I'm alive and still able to add 1 + 1. But I thought there may be enough. The question is whether there's enough interest in the boot process, and what I would like is people suggesting what they'd like covered and at what level, if anybody's had problems. And if nobody's had problems and everybody's, copacetic, grub is great, and the dual booters amongst us don't want to be identified, and they're having no problems, then I think it'll be worthless. So that's why I'm thinking between now and X months in the future, it'll either be an interesting discussion by email, and ultimately can lead to a presentation, or the outcome will be we want to vote not to have it. So that's it.
We're speechless.
Well, I'll
That's
make a
unusual.
comment. I'll make a comment about dual booting. I'm not using real recent Windows or any Windows really, but like this laptop has Windows Vista on it, and the way I see it, I did not put Grub on the hard drive in this computer. I put Grub on a USB device like this. And when I turn the machine on, I press F12 and it gives me a choice between what device I want to boot off of. So, and I pick this device that I plug into it. And then I get a menu for Grub. And then if you read all the documentation for Grub, which I have not done, and I'm not familiar with, but it's out there if you want to learn all the details of Grub. You can see how the things are done with Grub and how powerful it is. And I don't know if you can get documentation about how Windows is booting and all these bizarre files in Windows. It's proprietary. So I'd prefer to just not get mixed in with the Windows booting. Again, it's older. I'm not really messing around with UEFI or anything like that, but you can get that stuff to work. I've got one laptop that you can switch between UEFI and legacy booting also, which I have to do in order to make this thing work on it. So to me, that makes it simple. If I can get away from Windows booting, and boot off my own device, like a USB device, then it's simple to me anyway, to do it that way.
Is your operating system on the USB or is it on the old Vista computer?
There's ways to put the operating system on the hard drive on the computer. So I'm just booting off the USB device and telling it to look for files
Sure.
that I put on the hard drive inside the computer.
So you're jumping from the USB to the hard drive?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
That's to me a simple way of doing it.
Yeah.
To me, it's simple compared to trying to deal with whatever Windows wants, where I know where files are. I put the files there and I tell it to look where I put the files. And
Well,
go ahead.
I think it's a different question. The question is, if you don't dual boot with Windows, then you're in the comfortable world of Linux, and it should be a much simpler setup. And if it's EFI, you're looking at the ESP partition, where you'll have the EFI files for potentially all your distros if you're doing multiple distros. And you could make more complicated configurations, but yeah, that should work, and it does work for you. And I'm just addressing the issue of in general. So even if people wanted to hear a presentation without involving Windows, I think the boot process sometimes causes problems. In your case, you've mastered it. You've got a setup that works, so often that there's no issue. And I can see you saying, well, who needs a presentation? That's fine.
What I do, I don't know all the details of Grub or how to make Grub even boot Windows. I haven't even looked into it. I don't know. Maybe it's easy. I don't know. I haven't even bothered to look at it.
Usually using the chain loader technique, basically, which basically then says, here, I'm handing it over to the Windows boot manager. So you make Grub the first controller. I
would assume that doesn't work with Windows 11 unless you basically hack the registry to, disable secure boot.
Yeah, you generally don't have to hack the registry. You just have to set that, I would think, in the UEFI.
Well, Windows 11 won't install without secure boot. unless, I mean, this is my experience. There may be another way, but you have to set registry values in the installer to say, I don't care about secure boot. So it's not a default. Otherwise, it'll basically say your hardware platform is unsupported. Doesn't exactly tell you why, which is always
Yeah.
frustrating. But
I
just
don't
like
have
Windows,
Windows 11. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the thing. You're ahead of me. And again, if again, the issue here is whether there's a presentation about booting in any shape or form that's considered of general interest to be given. That's all.
Steve, maybe we should just have a general presentation on the boot process period.
Yeah, but I'm saying general in more detail than saying the BIOS hands off to the boot partition, and then the boot partition loads the operating system, and there you are.
Right.
You know, a little more in depth, especially in the case of what do you do when it doesn't work? Because if Grub is the general tool that most of us use, other than RE-Find, which I think often turns to Grub. There are issues, there are common scenarios where you use some of the tools to fix things. But, you know, this can be carried on, this discussion could be carried on by email. And as I said, I personally wasn't planning to offer it for February, simply because I don't think I'd be ready, and I'm not sure what kind of shape I'll be in January, you know.
Thinking out loud, I think the best way to do this would be assuming we want to have a demonstration, to build a multi-boot system on a virtual environment,
Exactly.
like this guy back here, and also create, that would allow us to create working as well as broken scenarios.
Exactly. Perfect.
I'd have to think about that. I haven't multi-booted anything in years, so I've not really interfered with Grub other than the default. Hey, would you like to set up Grub? In years. So I'll have to play with that a little bit.
Okay.
Well, we've not really. I mean, we've chatted, but we've not really gone around the room. So I think we can do that real quick before we go today. So I think you've heard enough from me. So Larry, what's going on?
Well, I'll just sort of reinforce what I was just saying about what I consider to be a big difference between Windows and Linux. In Linux, you can see what files, and you find out a lot about what's going on with files in Linux and on your computer. With Windows, to me anyway, it's very much more mysterious. Being proprietary, they don't necessarily want you to have any idea what's going on with various files that are involved in Windows. It's their business. So that's why I prefer to have my own little device, whether it's this thing right here or USB hard drive or whatever. And just let Windows, if you want to use Windows, just don't plug the device in and boot up Windows on your computer that came on. If you want to use Linux, you plug this thing in, tell it to boot off that device, go to Grub and set up your Linux place wherever you want it. If you want it on the USB device or on your hard drive, put it in either place. So I'll stop on that stuff right now instead of just rubbing it in. But it seems, this is what I do routinely. I do this every single day, and I actually edit the Grub config file every time it boots. So I remember what I'm doing since I do it repeatedly. If I just did this once every year, I would never remember how to do it.
Yep.
So, it's like anything. You set up one time, and then next year you want to do it again. You can't remember what you did. But
that's why I still use passwords.
Yeah, exactly. This is why this way of doing. I to me, this is important to, I mean, I try to, if I get a new, different computer, I would try to do the same thing on a different, whatever the computer is. Try to figure out how to do it. If it's if it's got Windows 11 on it, UEFI, I look in the BIOS, try to figure out how to boot off an external device, USB device of some type. So,
Well, I would welcome a step-by-step on how you routinely revise and update your grub config, because there's a lot of files involved and I think a lot of ways to make it screwed up. So if you are a master of that, which is what it sounds like, I would certainly welcome that.
well, I actually started out with, I don't know if you remember, there was, before Grub, there was something called Lilo.
Yep.
And there was a text configuration file. You didn't have to like reinstall Lilo, which they claim you have to reinstall Grub. There is actually a text file for Grub too, called something like custom.txt, which you can edit, just a text file, and edit your information in there. That's one way of doing it. It's just a text file. You change it, and when you run Grub, your changes show up on this in your boot menu. But then, when you get a boot menu showing your options, you can press E, the key E, and edit any of them that you want. So that's what I'm doing routinely every day. Is I'm editing the menu that just pops up on the screen, and telling it exactly how to boot.
Sounds like if you could make that as a presentation, it would be very clarifying.
The thing about it is, I'm doing this on a computer with 4 gigabytes of RAM. This is not I don't have any virtual machine or anything like this. This fancy stuff set up. And my internet connection, I'm in Hickory right now. I don't have a very solid internet connection all the time. I'm using Wi-Fi. It's hard for me to show you exactly, I'm not booting this in a virtual environment where you would be able to see it. We'd have to have sort of a live meeting and a presentation there if you wanted to see what I'm doing on my computer.
Plus, also, Larry, you're using hardware as almost like a security feature, because if you don't have that USB stick, you don't boot.
You don't boot unless you want to boot into Windows.
Right.
On your hard drive.
Exactly.
Yes. But anyway, I was, I don't jump on every new and great latest software all the time. It took me a while to get going with Grub because I was so used to Lilo in the text menu. You start looking at Grub and you'll see, like, I don't know how many different files there are in the Grub directory for Grub, but there just happens to be one called custom.txt, and I just noticed that on one hard drive I was just trying to boot off of, it had Grub on it, Grub 2 on it. That file was not there, so I just copied it off another device, stuck it in there, and lo and behold, here comes up the same menu that I was already looking at. And I did not. If you read the instructions, the manual for Grub, it'll tell you reinstall. You have to do Grub install all the time. You have to do, every time you make a little edit, you edit some configuration file, you got to do Grub install. But if you go in and edit this text file, custom.txt, it just shows up and Grub comes up, whatever you put in. So anyway, that's my 2 cents about what I know about Grub. I'm not a wizard on Grub. I just sort of try to figure out what I need to do to make what I have work. And like I said, I don't jump on Windows 11 or any of the newest and greatest, latest of anything, except I am running MX 23.1 and 23.3, which I think might be the latest one on that. With this type of scenario, booting off this thing, or a USB drive, a hard drive, whatever. Just have to make the device bootable. with grub on it. Use that grub, not mix it up with Windows, whatever is going on with Windows. It's always, every Windows might be different, like Windows 8, 10, 11, or whatever. You know, or even UEFIs. I'm sure that Leander and other people are more wizards on that than I am. I'm just trying to get by with what I like to do and what I can figure out. And
Everything's working because I've got a backup on this.
so I guess that's it for me right now. I might chime in on other people's comments.
All right, thanks, Larry. Any further and more responses on that before we move on? Steve?
Yes. On another topic, any other topic. We
Live streaming is on.
it's interesting. We were just having the lights going out. I don't know if you noticed that. All of a sudden, my background changed.
I
Yeah.
thought
So-
you turned the switch.
Yeah, well, the power lines twitched, but it happens that the one backup I've got is connected to my router and and the modem and to this computer. So this didn't do anything. So it's good for about, I guess, maybe 10 minutes. So luckily there were only 30
Mine's good for
seconds.
about 20.
Yeah. Mine could be 20 also. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just guessing, and I'm trying to be conservative. It's one way I'm conservative. So what can I say? Well, basically, I've got no particular computer problems except the intellectual challenge. Oh, woo, yes, I should say this. There was a brief interchange between Joe and on the email about needing to get a router. I don't know if he ever followed up because he had a program, an AI program that said he needed to set up VPNs. And I don't know what he actually ended up doing after all, but that prompted me to go look up the pricing of the PCWRT router, which is fairly inexpensive. And the PC stands for parental control. And it's a brand that started out being for parents, to be able to have easily install security controls so that their kids wouldn't be going places that the parents didn't want. As far as I know, it's an OK router. I think it's an AC, so it's not the latest generation. I think it may be a 6. Anyway, I bought it because I went to eBay and I was looking for Joe, and I saw this one for $40 instead of the model that sells for 150. And it sounded, they said new, and it sold 4 more before. So I bought it, and I haven't yet started playing with it, but my plan is to check it out, see if it's easy to do some of the more elaborate things that I've never tried to do before, that are, basically fundamental for some of you folks, and consider replacing my current Edge router X, which is my primary router, with that, because my current wireless is an N. It's an old Apple Express station, the lowest level. And I seem to have all the performance I need. So as long as this one provides something similar, I would be happy. And I would be happy because it would allow me to play games with the security and try it out. So I'm planning to do that again over the next few months because I'm awfully slow. Just using a computer and playing with it as if I'm connected to the internet, but and that it's working. But it'll be just a mini toy network of that router and an physically attached computer. So if there's anything that I think that'd be of interest to the group in the next few months, I will report back. Otherwise, I also bought I bought a Wi-Fi USB attachment, and it turned out that it's one that uses a driver that is very problematic for antics. And the recommendation is not to use it, basically. And so then I futzed and futzed, and I got it to work. And having amazed myself, I then basically posted that on the site because a number of people have raised issues about getting Wi-Fi with one that uses this driver on Antics. It may be a problematic in general, it may be a problematic driver for Linux. It is, or from Debian based ones, it uses the RTL 8821 CU driver. And there was a buggy problem with the DKMS involvement. That it's the driver is all of that /DKMS when you create it, and then it produces a whole bunch of files. But somehow I got it to work in my very careless, non-documented, so I can't really say to somebody, here's the text file. It involved, all I can say is it involved going through a process of this is broken and you need to use a dpackage configure, which I did. And then all of a sudden it's generating a bunch of new files. And what I also did was I did that with an old kernel, because apparently you could build it. It was a question of getting it built properly. It refused to build. So if you use an old kernel, you might be able to build it. And then once it's built, it turns out after dpackage configure that it is working with my newest 6.1.90 kernel. So it was supposed to work up to be buildable up to 5.17, I think, but that wasn't the case. So, and I think it's with other. So if anybody else, of course, it may be very popular, is using a device that is using RTL 1822 CU, there is hope, and having problems, there is hope. Also, I saw other people were using the 1822 AU. One person reported they used that driver instead. So there's a number of different, I don't know why there's a CU and an AU and what God knows what else, but it may be that it's something that other drivers will work with this particular piece of hardware, even though the company, in this case it was TP-Link, says this is the driver you're supposed to use. But again, as a complete ignoramus about most things, I don't know when the degree of specificity is really so important, and when it's, hey, try 3 or 4 other ones and see if they produce good performance. So that's the other thing, Linux-wise.
How about voice over IP?
I'm sorry.
Voice over IP.
What about it?
You had something you posted on the Google group about VoIP with your service.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that Dan answered. Here's the issue. I can do one or another service that provides VoIP telephone service. We currently have been using for years UMA Basic, and which has the virtue of being cheap. The performance is generally pretty good. Sometimes the calls servicing is not good, but that's the internet. You have that as an issue. And Dan mentioned homegrown services that you could use to set up your own VoIP service. The drawback is, or the barrier is, as far as I can tell, subject to correction, that you need to acquire a telephone number from somebody who can sell you a telephone number. And that's where the servicing part comes in, I guess. I'm imagining that whether you set up your own, ATA itself, and you're just using you're just using the company to provide the telephone number, you're going to have to pay them something each month, and then it's going to be a question of how many calls you can make. But I could be wrong. I don't know how I would get my own phone number that other telephone companies would accept. I think it has to be certified as unique, and something that from a registered company that can say this is legitimate. So if that's the case, then it seems like I might look into different services. Well, what I really want, and is not necessarily so simple with UMA and their premier service, is to get the ability to whitelist. I'm at a point where I'm happy to say, if I can do whitelisting and then maybe offer other callers the chance to leave voicemail if they're not on the whitelist, to me that would be kind of an ideal situation. And then after a delay, I'd be picking up voicemail, and those people who chose to leave a voicemail, I could say, okay, you sound legit, I'll respond to you, and maybe add you to my whitelist. So that I really would love to hear if people have solved that for themselves in a satisfactory way. I'm not interested so much in blacklisting because I realize there's an infinite number of phone calls, it seems, essentially, and that no blacklist works perfectly. However, if someone has a blacklist that is working adequately enough so that I wouldn't mind getting 1 or 2 phone calls a day that were, silent, or where I'd be a boiler room answer, I'd certainly love to hear about that. That's it. So that one, I'm seeking comments either right now or via email. And that's on my Linux. Otherwise, it's all a matter of medical problems. And God, we don't want to discuss that, do we? No. Okay. So I'm finished.
All right. Any response to Steve on that, or is that we're gonna take that to the loop?
Well, only thing I would say is follow up and say, Steve, the things I sent you were all PBX related, and I assumed that it would use your existing voice over IP number rather than having to grab a company that would provide you a number. That's all.
Just in response, that may be the case. I did not know at my current level how I would connect a PBX because they have their own box. So I don't
Right.
know if they sell the service without the box. I think that the box was a
Probably
requirement for
not.
this service. Pardon?
No, it's a proprietary service, so you're not going to get them to work with that.
Oh yeah. Well, that's where I'm wondering which
Right.
service would allow me, would say to me, here, you pay us $2 a month or $10 a month, and you set this stuff up, and then you make as many calls as you want because we're only in the business of providing, telephone numbers
Yeah.
that are acceptable.
Right.
And I have Google Voice, and they gave me a number, and that's a
Right.
freebie. Problem with Google Voice is that Google has been known to cancel services without notice, and I'm a little reluctant to say, well, if it happens, I'll change the number again.
Yeah. You don't use it, you lose it.
We're using it a little bit. I've got a couple of people who call every once in a while, so Google Voice is comfortable with us. We just have to verify the phone numbers the phones it dials. Anyway, so that's what. Thanks, Dan. You make the point very well. I'll be happy to do a homegrown solution if if it was easy enough for me. Number one, and number two, if I could find a service that said, "Fine, we don't care. We'll send you the number. You'll pay. You will rent the number to you. You'll pay us every month, and then you'll be able to set up whatever hardware. Here are the instructions for how it has to work. What ATA you need to use, or what." Whatever it is that to make it work. And you can pick something that'll give you control every which way. Whitelist, blacklist, purple list, push a button first, tell me your name first, whatever.
Well, the solutions I sent you both have white and black lists. So
yeah, I mean, I'm assuming those are good solutions, except I'm not sure where I get the person who says, I'll sell you the number and it'll connect anything.
Right.
So that's basically, I didn't see anything on the internet. And, I assume that they probably exist, but, all I'm paying UMA for the basic is $6 a month. So if there's a service that would say, hey, we don't even need to do anything but give you a number, and the only I guess question I have is the person who gives you a number or the company that gives you a number, are they responsible? Is that like an ISP almost, that they are responsible for making sure that the telephone numbers come out of the internet properly routed to you, so that in a sense you still have quality of service issues if they get slowed down?
I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
I used VoIP many years ago. Left it.
Yeah.
It-
Okay. Thanks for reminding me, whoever did, to mention that. Was that you, Dan?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Mhm.
Now I'm fulfilled.
Thanks, Steve.
Sure.
Pete?
Yes, without power for a few weeks, wasn't doing much computing. And then I headed up to Vermont. But during those 2 weeks, some interesting things went on. Number one, we have a lot of shagbark hickory on top of my mountain. And when the hurricane or whatever it is came through and blew all the leaves off the trees, it also blew a heck of a lot of those little green hickory nuts. They were basically almost covering the ground. And there was only one place on our mountaintop where you could get sometimes cell service. And that was in my backyard overlooking Swannanoa. So for 2 weeks, I had quite a few of my neighbors lined up on that edge of looking down into Swannanoa, trying to get their cell phones to work. And 30 or 40 feet up a little bit from that edge, I had 3 or 4 black bears sitting on the ground munching on those shagbark hickory nuts. And both groups were ignoring each other, thank goodness. But it was an interesting situation. I had one teenage resident. He had to get on his cell phone. He walked up at 9 o'clock at night from his house, pitch black. We don't have any street lights or anything. And walked up my driveway, got up to the top, shined his light around, saw the smaller of the black bears sitting on the ground munching on nuts. And then he shined his light further up into the woods and saw all these eyes looking back at him. I knew he was at my door. So he'd like to get in, not afraid of the bears. So he said, yeah, come on in. And just about that time, one of the other neighbors drove up and we were able to get him a ride back home and not have any issues. But, who would have thought? And then the other thing I make people aware of, my barber is the Oakley Barber behind Home Depot, Stan and Lindsay, and he's been in there cutting hair for 30 something years. They got flooded out. He did not have a lease. He's been renting it monthly for the last 30 years or so.
Goodness.
There's 4 little stores in a row and one of the taco food trucks at the end of the row. It turns out the owner of the 4 stores is the guy with the taco food truck. And when Stan got washed out, he said, there's no way I'm going to be able to refurbish this. I just don't have the cash flow to do that. So you're out. So, and I needed a haircut bad. So I called, talked to Stan. He said, well, we're cutting hair on my back porch up on North Asheville. Can't remember the name of the road, but gave me instructions on how to get up there. And I was able to get there. And sure enough, He had two little fold-up chairs on his back porch, and there was a couple of guys there, and waited in line, got my hair cut, and I was very happy. But he also had flooding up at his house. His basement got filled up. So he's got no barbershop anymore. His house needs a significant amount of restoration and mud abatement. So if anybody uses the Oakley Barber, you can go up and get your hair cut at his house, and it's been pretty warm up there. So we had a good time sitting out there on the porch chatting. I think, let's see. Yeah, I think, oh, that was the other thing. I was in such a hurry loading up stuff to bring down to Florida here. I forgot all my Raspberry Pi stuff. So fortunately, I have to go back for more doctor's appointments, and I'll hopefully remember to bring it down so I have something to play with down here. Yeah. That's it for me, Brett.
Well, thanks, Pete. Alan? You're muted, Alan.
Push the button. That's good.
Nope.
Oh,
Muted.
You're back.
There we go.
No,
Uh-oh.
still no audio from you, although you are showing as unmuted. I'll move on and we'll get back to you. Dan?
Okay. Well, I don't have a lot of Linux stuff. Of course, I was without power with Helene for 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that, and no internet. And what I did was, prior to Helene, I had contacted through email something I told you I was going to do. I contacted the chancellor's office at UNCA to look for a physical space. And I was told my email had been redirected to the reservations area at UNCA. And then, of course, Helene hit, and I hadn't heard back from them. So I sent another follow-up, and then Helene hit. And I didn't realize that the UNCA campus got hit pretty severely. So I got on the phone a couple of days ago, and I called the chancellor's office to follow up, wondering why I hadn't gotten a response from the reservation area. And what they suggested to me was go ahead and send another email directly to the reservations area and carbon copy them so they could follow it. And so that's what I've done. So that's where I'm at with that process. I've asked for a space within the Student Union Center, second floor, which is more than enough that can accommodate us. I said accommodate 10 to 12 people with laptop usage, and a space where we could also have presentation capability with an HDMI connection to a laptop and a whiteboard or a screen that would project to it. And so I'm waiting to hear back from them on that. And that's only been a couple of days. So we'll see what goes with that. I think that's probably going to be our best bet for this area. Steve, you had a question?
Yeah, I know the campus because I've been in the senior college on the campus for many years.
Right.
And one of the issues that may occur is parking. So if we
There's a separate parking area.
Yeah, well, there are several separate parking areas. I'm thinking some of us, like me, might be mobility challenged, and I'm just I believe it depends when they get themselves together whether there's a bus we'll be able to take within by parking at the entrance. From at least one of the entrances, there's a I think an open parking area, but just to be aware of that as a consideration before we just say we'll meet there, that people will need to know how they're going to get to the student union building, because a lot of the parking is restricted to people with, who are students, resident students, and even the ones for Ollie. There are only certain parking lots with our registration that we're allowed to use.
Dan, I muted you. Sorry.
Okay, somebody's got some noise going on somewhere. I'm not sure where. Anyway, I'm an alumnus of the campus, so I chose the Student Union Center because directly down from that, there's an alumnus parking area. And so what I was going to do was ask them if I could get permission to use that parking area for our group. And if that's the case, it'll solve it. And they do have accommodations for people with handicaps, Steve. So you'll be able to, like a wheelchair or something like that, you'll be able to get up to the building itself if that's what your handicap is. I'm not really sure. But anyway, moving on. The other thing I've been working on, the only other thing I can think of is I'm still working with my Drupal course from Madrid, Spain, of course, with my loss of power for 2 weeks. I contacted the instructor because I wasn't able to reach the course without internet, of course. And my course was supposed to end on the 18th of this month in order to get a certificate. I'm 31 activities out of 45 into completing it. And I wanted to be able to complete it and get a certificate out of it because it is a Drupal 10 master course. And he actually was kind enough to extend my time to the end of December, end of the year. So should be able to complete the course with no problem. And then the other thing I was doing is I sent out a couple of forum messages about our website. I've been working on that and making some improvements and adding some features. And it's also now a worldwide website only, so you can't reach it using https:// and the domain name. You have to put in the www dot. If you don't put in the www dot, you get a 404 page not found. So, I mean, I could do both and redirect with 301 redirection, but that's too much work. I don't want to do that. So I just turned off the non-www and made it www only. And so anyway, I just wanted to point that out. But I have added a feed to the right sidebar on our website, and I have added a link in the menu, main navigation, for something I call the library periodical desk. And this is not Linux, Unix, open source related, but it's for folks that might visit the site that want to read. And so I'm planning on putting a bunch of short stories up there, some other periodical information so that they can read that while they're on the site. And I've donated my own short story that I've done on time travel, and also an essay that I did on, it was on Marxism versus socialism versus fascism. So you can take a look at that as well. That's all I got.
Thanks, Dan. Leander?
Don't think he heard you.
Hardware mute.
Oh.
So it's I was without power for a little over a week, but I'm a first responder, so I basically lived at the fire station anyway. Turns out our backup generator at the fire station was it was older and it was not meant to be run more than 36 hours, and we ran it for 300 and blew a head gasket. But we had so many generators donated, like we have 5 or 6 down there now. Did a lot of debris clearing and handing out food and water and stuff during that time. Not a lot of tech stuff. When I finally did get back around to hooking my desktop back up, or getting my desktop set up, an SSD had died in it. So then I just this week got around to buying a new one. The old one was 2018 Samsung, and it was well out of warranty. So I've had 5 Samsung SSDs die on me, and so I'm sticking with Crucial now. But I got a Gen 5. This board is only Gen 3, but I'm probably going to upgrade the whole machine in the next month. I got a uh, through some hardware testing work, I got a newer Threadripper bare CPU donated to me. So or it was like an old stock that they just wanted to get rid of, and so I just have to buy a board and RAM. But it'll support Gen 5, so I figured the new SSD will actually be able to run at full speed on that machine. Um, so that's been good news. Our bees did not make it through the storm. Well, they made it through the storm, but then the yellow jacket swarms after that basically finished them off. They were kind of low. It was really weird going into August. They were going like gangbusters. I guess they had a swarm or something late in the year. I didn't check on them for 3 or so weeks, and then when I came back in early September, uh, there was like nobody in the box, just a queen and a few workers, and they had no honey, despite having been feeding them. So I'm not sure what happened. But on the side there, you had a couple of beekeepers from off the mountain, who have come up, and they're going to be donating us a couple of hives in the spring to replenish it, because a lot of people up here, and I didn't think of this, but bees forage off of water, and we had a lot of water up here with like standing oil and stuff in it. And so he was like, yeah, there's probably a lot of beehives that were, marginal to, not wouldn't be in bad shape if you kept feeding it, but they probably went out and foraged after the storm, in between the yellow jackets and the um, toxic everything out there. I'm still not drinking my well water because well, outside of boiling it, if I boil it for coffee or something, but I'm trying to find a place that'll do like a heavy metal test or something. The uh, health department here will do like a bacteria test, but I'm not really worried about that. Bacteria in the water is one of those things you can either boil it or get rid of it, or hit it with a chlorine tablet and knock it out. The amount of stuff that I guess people saw the pictures I saw to the list. The amount of oil drums, oil containers, monitor heaters, fertilizer, all of that stuff, all that's washed in the water around here. Our well's pretty deep, but we did have a couple of people who got terribly sick locally after drinking their water. So if you have a well, make sure you get it tested. If it
Was your wellhead below water? Was it underwater at any point?
No, and that's I'm worried about the groundwater, because all that stuff that washed in and soaked into the ground had to go somewhere, and so I'm probably more concerned than I should be, but it's just weird that you can't get like I don't know where to go to get like a test for like pollutants instead of just biological stuff. You know what I mean? So, um, go ahead, Steve. Did you raise your hand?
I was going to suggest that a starting point might be even the website for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. I know a while ago, and we failed to do this. We got an offering from Asheville to test our water because they wanted to ensure that the pipes were lead free. But I would assume that if none of the county health departments have environmental health to test that the State Department would know and either punch you, send you where to go to find out, even if it's a commercial service. But at least that way you'd find out something that was available, hopefully.
Yeah, that's a good. I'll reach out to them. I just we had a couple of fire department guys in the fire department who, once their power came back, they drank their well water, and that was clearly, it got like massively sick afterwards, and that was clearly something biological had gotten into the well system. So like I said, I've been drinking it boiled, but it just got me to thinking about, like, you always hear about the PFOA getting in the water, and I mean, there were just tons of industrial chemicals and containers. I mean, like it was there was like a junkyard up the road here by Kevin's house, and it flooded, and like I mean everything washed into the bridge down the road, and I mean it was like tons of oil, hydraulic fluid, all that stuff, and it's got to go somewhere. Hopefully, I do know that someone at ASU monitors water quality, and they said it is god awful right here right now. They were like, I would not go swimming waiting, not only for the temperature, but just the E. coli and all that stuff is off of the charts from the cow, from all the agricultural runoff that got into the streams and the wells and stuff. Boone has had Boone's not as bad as Asheville. They had a boil water advisory for a few days, and now they're having they just sent out a not a warning, but like a notice that their iron levels have increased, and to be careful how much town water you drink, and they don't know why. So it's kind of, yeah, I don't know. That's been a concern lately. So yeah, definitely keep an eye on your water, especially for your pets and stuff if you're watering them out of that. That's
Can I
go ahead, Steve.
just
Yeah.
interpose? Where we happen to live, right near us is a what do they call it? A super tox site, where there was a company that kept on dumping stuff, and it contaminated the groundwater. Several of the families had histories of a lot of people with cancer, and finally it was cleaned up, I guess, by the division of the federal government once it was after many years. So somebody, I mean, water quality, like you're concerned about, is a serious issue, and I would definitely be concerned. I know we had a well in New Jersey, and it's my recollection that when we bought the house, which came with the well, that it had to be certified to be fit, in terms of things like lead and other toxic metals, and obviously biologics. So yeah, I mean, if you don't find any easy place to get it done, let me know, and I will, just as a curiosity, I will try to see if I can find some place that would be worthwhile.
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah. We had it tested when we bought the place, but I can't remember. I mean, that was many years ago now, and I cannot remember if that was just for like E. coli kind of bacterial stuff, or if they looked at the metals and pollutants as well. So, yeah, but just a thing to be aware of. I know Asheville has got the water is still kind of like murky and cloudy from what I've heard down in the city down there. There's a pretty big YouTuber, LGR, who lives in Asheville, and he does like a lot of retro computer stuff, and a whole tree fell on his house, and like we're talking, it's like a tech museum there, and just like mold and water got into a not a significant portion of his collection, but like you're talking like Apple Newtons new in box that are just mold and ruined now. It's like, yeah. So it kind of makes you wonder about, how much stuff do you really want to keep around your house? I have learned a lot about what homeowners insurance will and will not cover, working with people. We had in Blowing Rock, there was like 4 houses on the side of a hill that they didn't suffer any damage, but one of the utility companies working up the side of the hill noticed that a fissure had opened up near the crest of the hill, and the town, I mean, these people were sitting in their house apparently with power and everything just fine. That town or the county came down and was like, you've got to get out. This hill's going to come down at some point in the future. These 4 houses are now condemned. And we're seeing that around the county too, where a lot of people who thought they escaped the storm unscathed now are ending up with like either massive bills because one of our directors at work had the road collapse up. There's a private road up to his house and his 4 neighbors, and the structural engineer came out and looked at it and was like, you probably shouldn't be driving on this, and it's going to cost about $150,000 to have it fixed. And so it kind of makes me wonder if like phase 2 of this disaster is people, and we've been getting predatory texts about like, oh, we'll buy houses even if they're damaged. Is going to be people getting their property bought out because they can't afford to fix it. So I'm looking at getting like a earth movement policy. I live way up a side of a hill. Well, not way up, but high enough that I'm not really worried about flooding. But this has brought more to my attention being worried about landslides. I think my zero maintenance policy on the woods and the land has really helped because there's a lot of deeply wooded plants up there, that rooted plants up there that I'm hope probably held everything down. But yeah, it was, yeah, you guys probably realize that being older than I am, but it's kind of shocking and revealing just what insurance won't cover. And thankfully we had a lot of volunteer organizations come up, and a lot of other fire departments from down off the mountain. Northern Wake Fire actually donated our department a new brand used generator for a full site generator. The one we had was 20 kilowatt, the one that blew up, and didn't have enough power to power everything. So they donated us a 40 kilowatt water cooled model that can run for weeks just fine. So it's got some hours on it, but not really. So not really a lot for what it is. So we just got to haul it out and wire it into the transfer switch. But yeah, other than that, we did pretty. I feel a little guilty because I didn't get a lot of damage, and there's a lot of people a lot worse off than me. But other than that, not a lot of Linux stuff.
Right.
Yep. Sorry,
Yep.
I've been rambling.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah.
It's good to catch up with folks, and thanks, Leaner. Thanks for what you're doing with being a first responder. And I'm going to go to Sam now because he's making me hungry.
Nah.
Yeah. No, I've been, I'm here in New Jersey now, and I've been looking at videos of the damage on YouTube. And there's one guy, I've forgotten his name, Trevetti, something like that. He's done some really nice videos. He's been going around to Swannanoa and Black Mountain and sort of chronicling the, the activity, driving up the roads that are damaged and looking at houses that are damaged and looking. He's got a drone and he goes up, looks at the mudslides and stuff like that. They're really nice videos if you come across them. Because I know my brother-in-law in Swannanoa is looking for drone footage because his property is somewhat damaged. He lost his spring and he now has to restore his spring water. And he also has some damage to his shed or his workshop. He had a woodworking shop, and I guess some tree fell on it and sort of bent up the tin roof on it. But there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. And there's another guy, GeoPlan or something like that, who talks about the rivers and explains why the rivers overflowed. There's French Broad and the Swannanoa. Nice videos. Other than that, I don't have too much else to report. As far as water quality goes, here in New Jersey, the local water company sends me a test kit every 6 months and tests for lead. And when I send it back, they thank me and they give me $50 off my water bill, which seems pretty good to me. That's it.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Let's see if Alan's working now.
Can you hear me now?
You're noisy,
Good.
but we can hear you.
All right. Should I turn down my microphone volume?
That would be probably good. Yes.
All right. It's coming down. All right. Can you still hear me?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. I've, like everybody else, I've been consumed by the storm and the flood. I live near the Cane River in Yancey County along U.S. Highway 19W North. And we were one of the hardest hit areas in Yancey County. And it just completely demolished the highway, the road system. It wiped out virtually every private bridge that crosses the river. So a lot of people have homes, they have no way to get to them now. All the power poles were completely demolished. But the good news is the state DOT and French Broad Membership Electric Cooperative have done a heroic job of rebuilding the road system and installing new utility poles and getting the power turned back on. But through the course of this event, I've learned a whole lot of new stuff that I never really was involved with, mainly about how generators work and backfeeding generators to circuit breaker panels, which is not advisable, but was necessary. And the last couple of days, I've been working on solar technology because the power is now off at Mount Mitchell State Park. And we're going to try to get up there and install a solar system that will run our radios and our cameras and our weather station, because a lot of people really enjoy looking at what the weather conditions are at the park. And that's basically it. Just trying to deal with this, but it does look like things are slowly getting somewhat back to normal.
All right. Thanks, Al.
And one other thing. Let me say one thing. Steve asked, we were talking about radio communications and what frequencies people were using. Well, a real bright spot in this whole catastrophe has been ham radio operators. And I'm on this 2-meter repeater at Mount Mitchell, or near Mount Mitchell. And it has just been a godsend because people from 7 states are able to communicate with each other over the Mount Mitchell radio net repeater. And ham radio operators have stepped in and have coordinated relief efforts. They've taken the Avery County Airport. I mean, Leander probably is pretty familiar, more familiar than me, but they are running air control. There's helicopters and military aircraft that are landing there with just tons and tons of supplies. And people have donated so many goods that they're asking people not to donate any more goods because they have no place to put it. But hats off to ham radio operators for really stepping in this crisis and making communications work.
Yeah, I'm kind of down in a hollow here, and I can't really hit into GE. That's the Mount Mitchell repeater from here. I can hear it sometimes. Probably need a better 2-meter antenna. But I mean, I'm so far down in a hole. Like, I live 10 miles from the Boone repeater, and I can't hit it with a handheld. Yeah, around here I could hit Wilkes, Ash, Boone, sometimes Lenore, but yeah, it was mostly 2 meters. Strangely enough, that first day, that Friday after the storm, the Friday of the storm, the Watauga County, where my fire department's right on our fire station's literally on the county border. Half of it's in Ashe County, half of it's in Watauga County. I live in the Watauga County side, and Watauga was early Friday morning. Their VHF dispatch everything Viper was gone, and they were using the ham radio repeater. You heard police traffic going across it, and that's also a thing. during an emergency, all bets are off on radio. If you don't have a license, you can transmit on, if there's a danger to your person or property, you can transmit on any frequency to get attention. So, there was a lot of that. But once Starlink got donated to the department after that first few days, the radio stuff really became less necessary. I think what I took out of this is that in the age of Starlink, ham radio has limited utility comparatively. That first few hours, but man, once they Ash County donated, I'm sure what's his name on Twitter wants to take credit for it, but FEMA actually bought the Starlinks and donated them to the county EOC, and the county gave them to us. So don't let him. Anyway, getting ranty, but he once those got out there and we got them set up and hooked up and working. And in fact, that's what we're moving to Starlink for our internet at the station permanently. But once that got hooked up, man, the radio was like an antiquated thing. Nobody was, just it was just back to ham radio nerds using it. But that really, I know you could do month to month on Starlink, and I know they have like a little backpack size version of it. So part of me is kind of like, I could just buy the little backpack size Starlink, and then if we go out to the beach or somewhere, I could just buy like a month of service for $60 or something like that. Because it was, upload was pretty slow, but it was pretty fast. It was pretty fast. Sorry, I'm rambling again, but yeah, the radio stuff was definitely out there. I didn't. There was an HF net from Florida when Helene rolled up into Florida down there, and there was another one with Milton too. If you've got an HF antenna, you can listen to. But yeah, VHF and UHF. A lot of people are using GMRS around here. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but that's pretty popular among people who just need an emergency line of communication and don't want to think about the radio nerd side of things. They just want to buy a box of equipment that just works, and that's been popular too. There's a number of those repeaters here. So yeah, radio did help until Starlink showed up. So
I totally agree. GMRS, General Mobile Radio Service.
Yep.
You have to pay for a license for the higher power GMRS, but there's no test or anything.
Yeah.
And people are setting up these GMRS repeaters, and they are terrific. I mean, they're really giving, emergency people and the public access to communications when the internet was, no power, so that wasn't available. So it's anyway, that's what's going on.
All right, thanks, Alan. Rusty, are you able to speak?
Yeah, hey, some thoughts following up on Steve's interest. I'm reminded, it might be overkill, but there is an open source software called Asterisk, spelled Asterisk with an RISK ending. There were some people connected to, there was at least one person who was in the Greenville Linux user group that was active in the development of that. And I'm sure it would have a lot of routing capability for creating white lists or controlling calls and voice messages and answering machine sort of setups. And it certainly would handle voice over IP. It's probably, I mean, it's a big capable system that you could run a giant corporation PBX off of, but it could also be used by an individual who wants to delve into the services that it offers. I spent all of the last month, the 13 days without power were filled with such a surreal script of traveling back and forth to Swannanoa, clearing brush and taking trees off of things. But finally, things getting back to normal. It was great to get electricity for, since I hadn't really made no provisions for setting up some backup power like a conversion from 12 volt through inverter. I just had nothing of that set up, so I just abandoned my computers for that period of time and was lucky to get cell phone service occasionally. One of the things that I want to delve back into, now that taxes have been done, that was great to get them done in the month of, with an extension into October and extension into a hurricane. I've delved some into LiDAR data sets to look at land surface, and I want to go back and get into all of the rendering software for that, partly because I've always loved topography and mapping and landforms, and the flood has caused me to really wonder about certain watersheds and certain stream valleys that I know so well. It's just that I had never witnessed their performance or behavior in unusually high water. But just because the hurricane is exceptional in its volume, particularly all the rainfall that preceded the hurricane, it causes me to be really interested in a lot of the man-made modifications of these systems that, you know, that are former wagon roads and you know, riparian systems and valleys that have been modified so much by our land reconstruction prior to a flood event. And so I'm looking forward to getting into some old LiDAR data sets where you, and actually I'm looking forward to when the new LiDAR data sets will come out and show actual surface that has been created, you know, moving boulder fields, you know, the movement of debris, all of this normal meandering oxbow sort of stream systems still applies. It's just that once you've channelized these streams and force the stream to stay in one location, then it has a lot of more pent-up energy. So if anyone on this list knows anyone that is interested in GIS surface modeling, get me connected, because I've got a big learning curve to have to struggle with again. So if you hear of anyone that's interested in applying some of this to local data sets, I'm interested in that. My only other interest still is I'm going to go back and start using Zotero, the bibliography management system for citation references, and anyone that's into that, I'd like to hear from also. So that's about it.
Rusty, post that on the group because I've used Zotero.
Okay.
Rusty, on the LiDAR stuff, that GeoModels YouTube guy, he's a Virginia Tech professor, and he's in the area quite often, and he has LiDAR data that he shows overlays in his videos and stuff, and I think he's involved in taking some of it. And if I know PhD scientists very well, if you email him and ask him about that, he won't shut up about it. So I would suggest reaching out to him probably, because he works in this area. He works between Asheville and Boone a lot, it looks like, and takes data samples and stuff. So he could probably at least point you in the right direction.
So he is coming to the area on projects. It's not a second home or personal travel. It's some of his professional work.
Yeah, that's what it looks like in the channel. He was just down into the Lake Lure and Chimney Rock area in August before the storm. So I don't know when he'll be back down, but if you click his YouTube channel and probably he's probably got an email in there or something, but you can get his name, and he's at Virginia Tech. I forget his name off the top of my head, but
is he a hydrologist?
He's a geologist.
Specifically?
He's a geologist, yeah, but he's shown LiDAR data sets in his videos overlaid on Google Earth, and like where you can see, particularly it was interesting on one of the landslides during Helene, you could see where it started way up the mountain, and when you show the LiDAR data, you can see where like the dent in the mountain from before the landslide, where it's like, oh yeah, that's pretty obvious that's going to fall at some point, kind of thing.
So that was an old fissure that had partially healed,
yeah,
and then reopened.
Yeah, it was one of those things. Yeah, or like it was like I don't know how to describe it because I'm not a geologist, but it was almost like the side of the hill has like an overbite where you get like this overhang, and it collapsed there, kind of thing. And when you look at it with LiDAR, you're like, oh, that's really obvious why that started there and then rolled down the hill. And these things have such mass, and they just follow along valleys, and it's like taking a scouring pad down valleys. As it goes down, it just accumulates more trees and rocks and mud and water. But yeah, I would reach out to him because, like I said, if I know PhD scientists, they like to talk about their specialty a lot, so he'll probably get you rolling.
Should I send you an email for a link, or what is the Google search?
I put it in chat there. If you can open up your chat, there's a link to his. Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. There's a link to his Virginia Tech. If you Google that, if you Google Philip Prince Virginia Tech, you'll probably find him too. So.
For anyone that's interested, one of the most blatant examples of a modification of a watershed is actually quite recent. Since the soccer fields were opened up in Asheville, in the Azalea Road area, which is the old floodplain in the Swarnoa River, between exit 55 essentially and the recreation park and the golf course. People may not know that the Swarnoa River at one time was fully dammed and had a small hydroelectric plant at the Asheville sort of zoo, and actually there's an Olympic swimming pool right on the banks of the river, which I'm sure was damaged, but the bridge that you go over to go to the rec park was the bridge over the spillway. And that was a scenic spot. You know, there was swimming in the old days, and that was the place to go in Asheville, in suburban eastern Asheville. And then, of course, they opened up the soccer field, and then naturally somebody wanted to join a pedestrian channel to the recreation park to the soccer field. So what did they do? They created an earth causeway to gain altitude, and the causeway climbs up from the soccer field, and then there's like a 6 or 8 foot wide pedestrian bridge over the Swarnoa River, which is still standing. But all that channelization routed all the water off center so that the water, crested the spillway and ultimately took out the earthen dam that held the roadbed that went over the spillway. And so the damage to the old spillway was vastly more because of the presence of a modern causeway, simply for the bravado, or should I say the impunity of just putting a causeway to a pedestrian bridge over the existing Swarnoa River. I'm amazed that it didn't blow out the pedestrian bridge, but somehow it didn't.
Steve, did you have something to add? All right. Well, we are very far after time, and I do have to skedaddle. So unless anyone else has anything of urgency, sorry, thanks, Rusty, for your contribution. But hope everyone continues to stay safe, and hope we hear from the folks we didn't today and check on them. But yeah, we'll talk next time. Again, we don't have anything specific planned unless I change my mind and go with what I mentioned. Otherwise, in January, I'll plan to talk about my virtual environment. All right, thanks all.
Okay.
Have a great one. Bye-bye.